Good morning and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim, as we continue reading Flying Against Time with Chapter 13. It was with a chuckle at Eben Browning's parting words that Ted Scott turned into his room and shut the door. But the smile on his face was only a transient one. The matter was too serious for joking. That night he had found himself enmeshed in a net that only the fortuitous aid of the candle had enabled him to break. The experience had taught him how much there had been in the warning of Bill Tremblay and Walter Hapworth. His natural courage and contemptuous disregard of personal danger had led him to take those warnings a shade too lightly. That night he had learned something of the cunning and resourcefulness and the ruthlessness of his enemies. It was too much to hope that they would give up their project because their first plot had failed. He might expect a respite, perhaps for a few days, while the discomfited rascals recovered from their rage and confusion. But they would surely try again, and would make assurance doubly sure as far as humanly possible. He must be on his guard day and night. He looked around his spotless, beautifully kept room that spoke of Charity's anxious regard for his comfort. There was a bed with its snow-white sheets turned down, inviting him to repose. What a contrast this serenity and peace afforded to what he had endured a few hours since. It was a broken and restless sleep that the young aviator got that night. The smarting of his burns was in part responsible, but much more was due to the strain he had undergone and the tumult in his mind. But his cold shower when he arose refreshed him considerably, and he resolutely put the grim events of the previous night behind him. He was able to dispense with his bandages, and as he studiously kept his reddened hands and wrists out of sight, he managed to pass muster at the breakfast table without arousing any degree of suspicion in Eben and Charity. It was more difficult to do that around the works, however, and Jackson, his mechanic, noticed the blistered hands at once. "Holy smoke, Ted!" he ejaculated. "What's happened to them hands of yours?" "Got them too near a flame," Ted responded, with an assumption of carelessness. "What's this about a flame?" asked Walter Hapworth, who in company with Mr. Monet had strolled into that part of the plant just in time to hear Ted's last words. "I'll tell you, fellows," said Ted, looking around carefully to see that no others were within hearing distance. "It's just as well that you should know what's going on below the surface. But it's understood that this is wholly confidential, isn't it?" All promised silence, and Ted unburdened himself, telling of the attack upon him the night before. His auditors listened with eyes full of surprise and indignation. "That's astonishingly unbelievable!" exclaimed Mr. Monet. "The audacity of the scoundrels!" cried Walter Hapworth. "And this is America in the 20th century!" "You let them off too easy!" cried Jackson, his honest face ablaze with wrath. "While you had that wrench in your hands, you ought to have pounded them to a pulp." "They deserved it, no doubt," replied Ted. "But as it is, I've given them something they won't forget for a while." "I'd venture to say that those scoundrelly Gales are at the bottom of this," exclaimed Walter Hapworth. "I hardly think so," replied Ted. "I couldn't make out their faces, but none of them had the build of Gregg or Duck." "They may have been too cowardly to appear themselves," hazarded Paul Monet, "but that doesn't mean that they might not have imported these rascals to do it for them. A few $1,000s would hire any number of thugs." "I don't doubt the Gales' willingness to injure me. They've proved that more than once. But I think this was an outside job," said Ted. "They seem to be working for a fellow named Dago Dan, and they appeared to be in deadly fear of him. Do you know who he is? Have you ever heard the name?" "I've a vague recollection of having heard it in connection with the operations of a Chicago gambling ring," replied Walter Hapworth. "However, I'm by no means sure." "I don't know whether or not you ought to keep this thing quiet, Ted," said Mr. Monet thoughtfully. "If you put the police on the job, they may be able to round up some of the scoundrels." "If I were just a private individual, I might," replied Ted. "But unluckily I am so well known that the newspapers would play it up. They'd send a news story, and their men would be down on me like a swarm of locusts. I couldn't go on with my work, and I need every minute for it in the short time that remains. No, I'll let it lie. It's so near the time of the contest now that they won't have many more chances to do me harm, and after the race is over they'll have no object in doing it." "Well, I suppose you're the doctor," rejoined Walter, "but this one thing I want you to promise. Don't go around anywhere alone. Make sure that someone's always with you. I'm at your service any time you want me, and I'm sure that Paul and Jackson feel the same way." "With greatest pleasure," Paul Monet assured him. "You bet I am," declared Jackson. "A bodyguard?" laughed Ted. "It's awfully good of you fellows, but I'm afraid it will make me feel foolish. I've always been accustomed to doing things by myself." "That Lone Eagle stuff is all right in its place," replied Walter, "but not when your liberty is threatened. If one of us had been with you last night, those fellows would probably have put off their attempt to some other time. Then, in all likelihood, it wouldn't have been pulled off at all. Come now, Ted, don't be foolish. If you don't think of yourself, think of your friends." "Well, when you put it that way, I suppose I'll have to give in," conceded Ted. "All right, I'll promise. But you fellows may be letting yourselves in for a lot of trouble." "We'll take a chance on that," replied Walter Hapworth, and Mr. Monet and Jackson nodded vigorously in assent. Several days passed before Ted Scott had to avail himself of his friend's promised good offices. Then late one afternoon the young aviator found himself in urgent need of an appliance for his machine that he knew could be obtained at a plant in Greenfield, about 10 miles away. "Here's where I call your bluff, Jackson," he said as he brought his roadster to a stop near where his mechanic was working. "It seems that I am under bonds not to go traveling alone, so hop in if you don't mind, and we'll run over to Greenfield together." "Sure thing," responded Jackson. "I'll take just a minute to wash up and I'll be right with you." In a short time they were rolling rapidly over the road. "There's a shortcut where the road turns when we're about halfway to Greenfield," suggested Jackson. "We'll save considerable time by going that way." "Suits me," replied Ted. "I have an appalling lot of work on hand, and I want to save all the time I can." They were not far from Bromville when they saw a car approaching them. "Those fellows seem to be hogging the road," remarked Jackson. "Yes," replied Ted, "but they'll probably turn off more to the right when we come closer." "It's those skunks Gregg and Duck Gale," observed Jackson, as he identified the occupants of the car. "Them loafers don't seem to have anything to do but drive around and raise merry heck generally." The car approached rapidly. It was a much heavier machine than Ted's light roadster, and the driver seemed determined to keep the middle of the road, which at that place was rather narrow. "Keep over to your own side," yelled Jackson, waving his hand to emphasize his meaning, but the car came plunging straight toward them without any sign of swerving. "Look out, Ted!" cried Jackson in alarm. "They're going to run us down!" Ted swerved to the right just in time to avoid a collision, and the right wheels of his car slumped into the ditch on the side of the road. Luckily, the depression was not very deep, or the car would have been overturned. As it was, it teetered perilously. Ted jammed on the brakes, and after running a short distance, the car came to a standstill. Ted was white with rage, but said nothing. Jackson was furious and shook his fist after the retreating car. "Those scoundrels!" exclaimed Jackson. "Another second and they'd have come into us a sham-bang. It wouldn't have hurt their heavy car much, but it would have smashed us into flinders. Was that just hoggishness, or did they really mean to run us down?" "It wasn't just hoggishness," replied Ted, "nor a matter of crowding us into the ditch, but a deliberately pitching us into it. That adds some more to the debt that I owe them. But that debt will all be paid with interest. Help me get the car out of the ditch." By the aid of some wood they gathered, and made flooring up the side of the gully, by which the car was able to climb out onto the road again. They examined it carefully, but apart from a couple of smashed mudguards, it seemed to have received no damage. "I'm going to hunt them fellows up when we get back to Bromville and give 'em a good what's coming to 'em," declared Jackson. "My fingers have been itching to get a hold of them for a long time past, and this gives me just the chance." "No," said Ted. "Leave them to me. I claim first hack at them." They resumed their journey and reached Greenfield without further incident. To save time, they took the shortcut along an almost untraveled road that Jackson had suggested. Had they glanced back, they might have seen one more car on that lonely road, following them at a distance. The car of Greg and Duck Gale, who had an object in knowing what road they took, and on which they would most likely be to return. The errand on which Ted had come took them longer than he had anticipated, and dusk was gathering when he and Jackson started back. They returned by the same shortcut, and, owing to the delay they had experienced, were traveling fast, when, just as they rounded a turn in the road, Jackson gave vent to a sharp exclamation. "Pull up! Pull up!" he shouted frantically. "You'll smash if you don't!" Directly ahead of them, a fallen tree blocked the road. Ted's keen eyes detected the obstruction as soon as Jackson had, and he instantly threw off the power and jammed on the brakes. But even at that, the car was fairly brushing the outflung branches before it came to a quivering stop. "Just in time," muttered Jackson with a sigh of relief. "Now why did that tree have to fall just now? We'll have to go back to Greenfield and come around the other way." "I suppose so," said Ted as he jumped from the car. "There's no room to go round it. Hard luck. But we oughtn't to leave it here this way, Jackson. Some other motorist might come along and smash into it. Lend us a hand, and let's see if we can't get it off the road." Though they tugged and hauled at it vigorously, it proved too heavy for them to move. "Can't be done," pronounced Ted at last. "But at least we can light a lantern and put it on the top as a warning. You'll find one in the back of the car, Jackson. Then when we get back to Greenfield we can report it, and they can send men out to remove it." Jackson secured and lighted the lantern, and Ted was about to attach it to a branch when he paused as a thought struck him. "Odd," he said thoughtfully, "that the tree should fall when there isn't any wind." "Right," said Jackson, a little startled. "I hadn't thought of that. There's hardly been a breath of air stirring all afternoon." Ted said no more, but walked around to the stump of the tree with the lantern still in his hand. "Come here, Jackson," he called. "Look at this." Jackson came and looked. The trunk had not broken off because it was rotten. It had been cut, and freshly cut. Chips scattered around showed that an axe had been busy. Jackson stared at Ted open-mouthed. "Cut!" he gasped. Ted stooped down and picked up some of the chips. "Still warm from the friction of the axe," he commented. "But who—" stammered Jackson. "Shh!" warned Ted, holding up his hand. He stood and listened. His hearing was phenomenally keen, and the night was still. He thought he could detect a faint rustling among the bushes that lay a little way off from the road. "Well, I guess we better be getting along toward Greenfield," he said in a loud voice. To Jackson he whispered, "Get into the car. I'll turn it around slowly with my strongest searchlights on. Keep your eyes open and see if you can pick up anyone in the bushes. I'll do the same. If we see what we're looking for, we'll jump out and make for them. Quick work now." I see," Jackson whispered back. They sauntered indifferently toward the car and climbed in slowly. Ted switched on the lights and began to turn the car about. In that dazzling semicircle of light, everything in the zone stood out brilliantly. "There they are!" cried Jackson suddenly. "I see them!" shouted Ted. "After them, Jackson!" Two figures broke from the brush and darted away like rabbits. And that's the end of Chapter 13. Next week we'll continue with Chapter 14, Merited Thrashing. I don't think I'd want to be on the end of that. Until next Tuesday, take care, stay safe, and God bless.